Hi, I'm Pastor David with Declaration Church, and I know, just like my family, your family probably has certain traditions that it has practiced and held on to for a really long time. I know for a long time in my family, we had a tradition that just growing up, on Christmas Eve, we would go and we would hang out with my mom's side of the family. We would celebrate Christmas together. And then after we were done, we would go to the candlelight service at our church where we were gathering together with other believers. And we would celebrate the birth of Jesus together with other Christians at the candlelight service that would get over just before midnight. It was really late service. And the reason that we did this was because my parents wanted to make sure that we could open up our presents on Christmas Day, and yet technically on Christmas Day, and yet they wouldn't have to get up early. So we would get home from the candlelight service. It would be just after midnight. We would go and put on our pajamas and get all ready for bed, and then we'd all gather together in the living room, and we would open all of our gifts. So that when my parents let us open our gifts the night before, basically, before we go to bed, technically on Christmas Day, the next morning we wouldn't get up early and wake them up so that we could open presents because we already did it the night before. And the reality is we're good as people at developing traditions. And what I mean by tradition is something that we do over and over and over again that it just becomes a practice. It's just the way we do things, the way we do certain things at certain times. And so we develop those kinds of traditions. And as Christians, as disciples of Jesus, that's how I define Christian, a follower of Jesus. If you're a follower of Jesus, you're a Christian. Not if you go to church or those kinds of things, but we're not going to get into that discussion. As followers of Jesus, we have a tendency to develop traditions also. In fact, the church has been developing traditions for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And there are times where we begin to hold on to a tradition so strongly without even knowing its origin, and yet it's contrary to what Jesus teaches us to do. So when it comes time we are confronted with what Jesus tells us to do that is opposed to that tradition that we hold, we really struggle to let go of the tradition because it's something we've held on to for a long time. And this is not something that's unusual. This is not something that is new to us as followers of Jesus. This has been something that's been going on for a really long time. In fact, Jesus addressed it in Mark chapter 7, starting in verse 6. He's speaking to religious teachers of the day. He's speaking to religious leaders. And it says this in Mark chapter 7, verse 6. And he said to them, "Well did Isaiah prophesy of you hypocrites, as it is written." So he's already basically, if somebody called you a hypocrite, you kind of take that as an insult most of the time. No, I would. And Jesus calls these people hypocrites, people who are practicing one thing and yet doing another. He says, "Well did Isaiah prophesy of you hypocrites, as it is written." So this is hundreds of years before this point in time that Isaiah wrote this. It says, "This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. You leave the commandment of God and hold to the tradition of men." So Jesus is addressing this. He says, you guys have a habit of grabbing onto the traditions of people, your own traditions, the traditions of your fathers, your ancestors, and leaving the doctrine, the truth of God behind in order to hold on to those traditions. And it's a lot easier to do that than it is to lay aside our traditions and begin to accept what God has and start to practice that instead. It's really difficult to leave those habits and practices that we've developed over time, and especially those that we've been taught by other people, by the people who taught us about Jesus, the people who have led us in our initial steps of faith. If they've taught us something that is contrary to the Word of God, either blatantly and on purpose, or just through the way that they act and the things that they say, implying those things, it can be really hard for us to let go of that and start to embrace what Jesus teaches us. And that's been going on for a really long time. But while it's really difficult to do, as followers of Jesus, it's something we have to do. We have to be willing to let go of those traditions in order to grab a hold of what Jesus is teaching us. And we need to begin to practice those things instead. It's not easy to do. I know there have been traditions that I've had to let go of as well in my own life. Thoughts and things that I had come to that I had to let go of in order to do what Jesus teaches. I used to think, we need to really work hard to defend the truth, what Jesus has taught us. And we do need to know the truth, and we need to defend the truth when we're asked to do so. We need to be able to give a defense, to give a reason for the faith that we have. That's scriptural. But we take that sometimes and we start to believe that what we need to do is argue people into the kingdom. And that's not what works. In fact, Jesus himself said, love one another. And by the way that you love one another, that's how the people around you are going to know that God sent me, that the Father sent me. That's what Jesus said. And so the number one thing we need to do for those people outside of the congregation of believers, those who are not following Jesus yet, is to love them. And yet, unfortunately, sometimes we feel like what we really need to do is keep them at arm's length until they believe in Jesus, when really we should be embracing them so that they can come to belief in Jesus. It's one of those things I had to struggle with to get to where I am now. And maybe that's something similar for you, and maybe there are some other things that you need to really look at and question, is this just tradition, or is this something that is actually taught by Jesus? And as we come across those things, I hope that you and I will be willing to let go of our traditions to embrace Jesus. Because that's how we really develop that relationship with him. And it's absolutely vital to you and I in our walk, in our faith walk, in our life as a disciple, to embrace Jesus and leave the rest behind. So I hope this video has been challenging to you. I hope it's been encouraging, and that it's given you a reason to just evaluate your own walk with Jesus, to determine whether or not there are things that you need to change and adjust so that you can walk with Jesus more closely. If it's been a challenge to you, if it's something that's been a blessing to you, if it's encouraged you in any way to go ahead and let go of some of those things that you've been struggling to let go of, then go ahead, give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, smash that subscribe button, and click the little bell as well so that when we post new content, you're notified. As always, I'm Pastor David, and I'm out.